Hi, welcome to Life on the Rock, and tonight our guest is Melissa Odin. She is an abortion attempt survivor, and she's going to share her story tonight and her journey of faith and healing. It'll be very inspirational. She'll, I think, inspire us all to grow in faith and forgiveness and healing. Good to see you, Doug.
You too, Padre.
We're in the midst of Lent,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Prayer, fasting, and almsgiving.
Yeah, mortification,
sacrifice.
developing deeper perseverance, endurance, tenacity.
All right.
Spiritual battle.
I found a great quote on prayer from the Catechism that I like, and it says, "We let our mask fall and turn our hearts back to the Lord who loves us, so as to hand ourselves over to Him as an offering to be purified and transformed." You know, all that happens in prayer. And, you know, prayer, I mean, Lent is about this time of conversion. You know, certainly we meditate on what our Lord has done for us, His passion. We enter into His suffering. And we also try to let go of the things of the world, the self, and all the things that distract us from God. And the Church recommends this time as an intense period of prayer, that we hand ourselves over to God to be purified, to be an offering, to be transformed. And I just love that, making prayer real. You know, as a religious, sometimes things can get routine, and you might have a lot of prayer events in your life, but it's easy not to go down deep, right, and pull something out and hand it to the Lord.
Right, and I always look at it as, you know, sooner or later we're going to have our last Lent.
Right.
You know, before we stand before God, there's going to be a last Lent that we're going to have, a last opportunity for these days to really be transformative in our lives. You know, so look at this as possibly your last Lent, because it might very well be. It will be for some, obviously.
Right.
But it is something that what a powerful opportunity that the Church gives us every year to take these days, these weeks, and let them, you know, do something within us. Like you said, reach down deep inside. It's kind of like an experience that you have with a loved one, you know, a spouse or a child or a good friend, and you know, you've always had a good relationship with them, and then something happens, some event happens that can really transform and deepen that bond, you know, be it a marital bond or a friendship bond or some other family bond. And Lent is that sort of thing that can transform our relationship and deepen the bond with God. But we have to cooperate with that.
Right.
That's the tough part, really, is because we can just kind of go through motions, like you say.
Right.
You know, as a layman with family, you know, I can just, you know, got my kids and my work, and, you know, me and my wife are doing this, that, and the other thing, and it can be very easy to just kind of let it become, you know, routine and systematic, rather than really taking those moments to, you know, ponder the deeper mysteries.
I want also to remind everyone, I know it's been in the news a lot, but just to remind everybody to be praying for this situation with our government and the health care mandate. You know, the EWTN does have a lawsuit against the federal government, and we need everybody to really pray hard for a conversion and change of mind and heart, you know, in this administration. I was at the USCCB, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops website, and they had these bullet points of things we should remember about this, because sometimes in the media it's getting spun, or really by politicians on the other side, it's really getting spun in a big way. But the bishops remind us that the mandate does not exempt Catholic charities, schools, universities, or hospitals. So it's requiring, you know, all these different organizations. There's no exemption. You know, you could be the Catholic businessman, or not even necessarily Catholic. You know, we often mention Catholics, but another bullet point is that, you know, many other religious and secular people and groups have spoken out strongly against the mandate. Because really at the heart of it, we're talking about a moral issue, you know, not about paying for sterilization, contraception, or abortifacients, right? That applies to everyone. That's not just Catholics. So there's, just because we have Catholic on an institution and name, they're not exempt. The mandate forces these institutions and others against their conscience to pay for things they consider immoral. Here at EWTN, you know, we're preaching this stuff, and the government is trying to force us to pay for this stuff at the same time. A clear violation of our conscience and the whole purpose of the network. It undercuts our whole reason for existence, you know, to preach the gospel, and it cuts away all our credibility if we're doing something different. The mandate forces coverage of sterilization and abortion-inducing drugs and devices, as well as contraceptions, right? So oftentimes you'll hear these politicians just speak of the contraception aspect of it, but it's also abortifacients, right? Ella, which is mentioned in the mandate, is an abortifacient. So it does include that. And, you know, we hear this number, you repeat a lie enough times and people start to believe it. This number of 98% of Catholics are contracepting. I was reading someone who did analysis of the Guttmacher study on this, and they said they included in this number, the 98%, 22 methods of contraception were cited, including NFP, right? So it's crazy. I mean, faithful Catholics, you know, can use NFP to space out births, and that should not be included in that number. So it is a lower number, but we hear it repeated ad nauseum.
And another number you're hearing is, you know, 55%, 66%, whatever number it is, of Catholic women approve of this and say this is a good thing. Well, you know, regardless of any of these numbers, it doesn't change the fact that it's a violation of our conscience. It doesn't change the fact that it's an attack on our First Amendment right of freedom of religion. And it doesn't change the fact that the church still teaches that things are wrong. Even if everybody embraced it personally and practiced things that were immoral, it doesn't change the fact that it still is a violation of our church teaching of God's law. So let's get off the numbers, statistics and such, folks. Let's focus on the truth here. The truth is, it's attacking our freedom of religion, our conscience, and regardless of what the percentages say, approve or disapprove, the truth is still the truth. These things violate God's law. They violate, you know, abortion, contraception, and so forth. These things all violate God's law. But this is more about the violation of the freedom of religion, the freedom of the conscience, and that's something that we cannot comply with. We just can't do it.
And a beautiful thing too is that we see Catholics of all political persuasions. The bishops make this point, are joining, they're crossing the aisle to join in opposition to this mandate. So hopefully we can make a strong front on this. Certainly ask everyone to pray.
Much prayer and fasting.
Yeah, right. And we want to go out with the Nun Run video. You want to set this up?
Well, yeah, we got to make a big push here, ladies and gentlemen. Nun Run's coming up very, very soon here, just a week and a half or so away here. March 10th. And, you know, Father and I are going out there. I'm going to run in it again, and Father's going to participate with the walk part of it. And, you know, my daughter, my son are coming as well. And last year we had close to 900 people there, and the sisters really, really look at this as a great opportunity to impact the funds that they need to continue to build their monastery.
This is out in Phoenix.
Out in Phoenix, yes, the sisters in Phoenix. And this is a beautiful place, and it's so necessary in our times to have these religious have an environment like this for prayer. It affects the whole world with this. So we're asking you to go out to the website, desertnuns.com, and make a contribution. Sign up and come down to Phoenix and run in it, walk in it, or be a shadow runner somewhere else in the world. Desertnuns.com. If you go there, Father Mark and I, you can donate in our name. Last year, I won. Thanks to all of you. Yeah, it was
$12,000.
Over $12,000, and thanks to all of you out there. So we're asking you to go out to that website, desertnuns.com. Make a donation.
Doug can get a T-shirt.
So, well, we're both going to get T-shirts anyway. But most importantly is we want people to go out and be part of this, family. So we're really pleading with the EWTN audience out there. Let's band together as brothers and sisters all across this globe. Go to that website. Let's make this last-minute push in the last week and a half we have here before the race, and raise these much-needed funds to help these sisters have the beautiful monastery they need to continue the great prayer and service of the Lord that affects the entire world. But this video is something we put together based on last year's race. My son shot it, and we edited it back at home, and we hope you enjoy it, give you a good idea of the Nun Run down in Phoenix, Arizona, coming up March 10th this year.
So you can donate on the sisters' website, desertnuns.com. And tonight our guest is Melissa Odin. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in a minute.
Hi, welcome back to Life on the Rock. I am Doug Barry. Very thankful that you're here. Along with Father Mark, we are the Rock House Compadres. This is the most important thing you could be doing right now at this time of your life, is watching this show or listening to it, or both. Because if you're watching it on TV, you probably should have the sound up so you can hear what's going on too, don't you think? All right. Good to have you here, though. We're very thrilled to have Melissa Odin on the show with us. And this is a fantastic show this is going to be, because you are going to reach into the hearts people and turn them upside down with your story. I mean, it is an incredible story. You are the survivor of an abortion attempt. And it's one of those things where we're living in a time right now where this is that one of those key issues that is affecting the entire world. And we're sending messages to heaven by how we respond to the things that are before us today, who we vote for, what we support, what we don't support, whether we're out there in the streets marching, who we're spreading the word to about this. And as you're going to explain to us tonight, there's a lot of people that even with your story, as unbelievable, tragic, and beautiful as it is, still don't even want you talking about it. Mm-hmm. It's an incredible thing to consider. So now we got the audience really, excited about, whoa, what's this story about? Oh, just got to keep watching and listening to see. But it is amazing. But let's get kind of some basics about yourself. Again, first, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Great to have you. You are a married woman, 6 years. You have 2 children, 1 miscarriage.
That's correct.
So 1 with our Lord, and then 1 living, who is 4 years old. Is that correct?
She's almost 4, and both of them are dearly loved by all of us.
Fantastic. But your story, your journey, let's get a little background on it. Before we get into the depth of the story, let's get a little background about yourself. You're now traveling and speaking publicly about this. But you grew up just an adopted child and always knowing that. Tell us a little bit about your early years.
Yeah, I thought I had a pretty normal life. I am from the Midwest. I'm actually from a small place in Iowa. People always find that interesting when I'm traveling somewhere. Yes, Iowa does exist in the United States, and that's where I'm originally from. And I grew up in a family where adoption was our normal. People always ask, well, when did you first find out you were adopted? I've just always known, because our parents made that clear to us from our youngest ages. And I say us because my older sister's also adopted. She's adopted from another family. But they made it clear to us that we were loved by them, our adoptive parents. We were loved by God, and we were loved by our biological parents. That plans for adoption were made for us when our families were not in a position to care for us. And so that was our normal growing up. And adoption was literally so normal that after 15 years of struggling with infertility, when our parents had a biological child of their own, we couldn't understand why they had him. I was 7 years old, and I'll never forget, they sat us down and they told our sister and my sister and I that they were expecting, and we turned to them and said, well, that's fantastic, you're adopting another child? And they said, no, your mother is almost 5 months pregnant. And I fell off the couch. 7 years old, I fell off the couch, and when I finally, settled myself back down and I looked my parents in the eye and I said, but why would you do that? Why would you have a biological child of your own? Why wouldn't you just adopt again? Because that's how normal it was and how loved we felt in our family. Certainly after my brother came along, we all knew that we were equally loved in our family, but that's how normal adoption was for us.
And you have an older sister, about 4 years older, right?
Yes, my sister's 4 years older.
Okay. And so, your surroundings, your extended family and so forth, everybody knew this was just the norm, everything was fine. You had no clue, though, that your situation was a little unique.
I never saw it coming. I never could have guessed in a million years that I was anything more than an adoptee. You know, as I was growing up, I knew I was born about 4 months premature. That's what my parents had been told at the time. Certainly we know that I was more like maybe 2 months premature, but you know, I knew those things growing up, but I knew lots of people who were adopted. I knew lots of people who were born prematurely. So I felt just as normal and loved as everyone else.
What would you say about adoption in general for the people out there who are considering it, or maybe unsure about whether or not to tell their own children that they have adopted them? How, you know, give a little wisdom and shed a little light on that subject, because adoption is a beautiful and powerful thing. But there are some people who are afraid, unsure when to tell their children that they were adopted. What are your thoughts on that?
You know what? Adoption is an amazing gift. I think that's a hard thing for me as someone who is an adoptee and was also aborted and survived, to see people talk about adoption in negative terms, that it's giving something up, giving someone away, you know, not loving them. I can tell you that adoption was the most loving action that took place in my young life. And I know that it was the love of my adoptive family that helped to heal me. And so, you know, I want adoption to be an option that people talk about. And I think it's important for children to know that they are adopted from a young age, because when we talk about it in loving terms, it reinforces everything that we know. We're all adopted by God in the grand scheme of things. We're all His children, and we are all loved. And so that was my foundation. And that has always been a part of who I am, and I'm thankful for that.
And so for people out there who are considering actually adopting a child, they're unsure about all the parameters and you know, it might be uncomfortable for them or so forth. I mean, what would you say to them about even taking that step?
Absolutely. You know what, if they are heeding that call that adoption is a step they should take in their life, then that is something that I would love for people to prayerfully consider, because there are so many children out there who need a loving home. You know, sadly, there are more people in our world who are waiting to adopt a child than there are children even available to be adopted. That speaks to the numbers of abortions.
Right.
But certainly adoption is a beautiful gift. And, you know, my own child can talk about the fact that every child deserves a family. My little 3-year-old can say that every child deserves a family. And I think adoption is a huge piece of that.
Yeah, so true. Abortion. I mean, it's a scourge of our society. It is just this unreal machine that is destroying so many lives. Before we get into your particular case, as you speak and travel and talk about this, you're finding more and more how many people can be affected by even one abortion. What are those numbers? They're staggering.
There was some research that came out, and I apologize because I don't have who put the research out, but in the last 6 months there was some research that came out that said every abortion affects 60 to 70 people. If we know we've lost 55 million children's lives in 39 years, then how many people have truly been affected by abortion?
That is staggering to consider. And it's not affected in the sense of they just have it historically in their family or extended family. The impact is brutal on most of these people, is it not?
Yeah, as I was sharing with you earlier, you know, when I travel to high schools, universities, wherever I travel around the world, I hear from young people who say, you know what, I know that my mother had an abortion. I'm stuck in this strange place of feeling guilty that I'm alive, but yet at the same time, I am so thankful that it was them and not me. And so without even talking about it, how many people are hurting from an abortion that took place, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? And we know that people change after an abortion. People change internally, their relationships with other people change. You know, we just certainly know it even impacts people's parenting habits. And so it leaves a lasting impact.
I mean, the numbers of those who are clearly speak of deep remorse and regret after going through it are very evident. They're very clear. You know, every year we go out and do the Walk for Life West Coast. We run into people constantly who are talking about, women who regret abortion, men who regret abortion. Now, what are you finding when it comes to the men that are out there? Because that's becoming more recognized. That how many men are actually speaking out more now, the impact that it's had on them.
That's a huge part of my life, and I think we'll get to that point, to share what I've seen in my own life, how it's affected men in my family. But I can tell you that I hear from men and women on a regular basis who regret the abortion, who reach out to me apologetically, wanting to apologize to me on behalf of their child whose life was lost.
And they're wanting to apologize to you because they know that an attempt on your life was made.
So in many ways, I'm that kind of pseudo child to many people around the world. And, when I first came forward with my story, I always thought I want to be so respectful of people's experiences, and I want them to know they're loved and they're forgiven. But I never thought I would be in this role of really extending healing to men and women around the world. I'm thankful for it, but I think it speaks volumes to both how women and men are impacted.
See, that is a phenomenal thing to consider, that something in the human psyche needs to, it's the idea of confession. When I go to a priest to hear my confession, hearing the words, your sins are forgiven, I absolve you of your sins. Wow, there's something about hearing that. I mean, Father, there's psychological as well as spiritual ramifications to hearing
definitely. Yeah, in fact, we tell women too all the time, there's so many great programs out there to help them deal with the trauma of abortion, and so that's usually standard advice, to talk about, especially with other women that have gone through it or experiencing it. That can be so powerful. Yeah, and it's part of the sacrament of confession that not only are you absolved, but on a human level, you can get some of this out, and the burdens can be lightened.
So I can see why going to someone, to them, they're living vicariously through you, the fact that they made that attempt that was unfortunately successful on the life of their own child. How do you respond to those people who come to you and say, I got to tell you, I'm sorry about what I've done with my own child, and you got to know, you're almost as if their child. They're wanting you to speak to them as if it's their child, to say you're sorry, or to say you're forgiven when they say they're sorry. How do you respond to them?
It's a very emotional thing. I think sometimes people don't understand when you're doing pro-life ministry, how emotionally and spiritually draining it can be. But for somebody in my shoes, I mean, I am living this out every single day of who I am and what people's needs are in this world. And I have a master's degree in social work. I can do therapy, I can work with people, but when people contact me, I always make it clear, I can't be that solution for them, but I can let them know that they are loved, they are forgiven. I love them and have forgiven them as much as my own biological parents, and that I know that their children are in heaven and are waiting for them and love them also. And then I point them to resources like Rachel's Vineyard and other resources that are out there for them. But it's really amazing because there are a handful of women that I have long-term relationships with now who are post-abortive and have been able to find healing, and I think our relationship has not only brought them healing, but it brings me some healing also, and that's just a beautiful gift.
And you have a very unique situation that God has allowed you to now and called you to great ministry with. And we're going to get into that. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to hear about that attempt on your life in detail. And let's pray that anybody watching and listening right now who may be in any way, shape, or form thinking about an abortion or has been involved in one, that their heart is open, that your heart is open right now, but the grace of God will speak to you, and you'll find some kind of healing. You'll find God's grace, you'll find His peace, and you'll find that path that gets you on that right track to bring your life back to where it needs to be. We'll be back after this. Don't go away. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. Doug Barry here, along with Father Mark, and we have our guest Melissa Odin here. This is again one of those stories that is rare, and I'm very honored to be able to interview you on this, Melissa, because this is especially in our times, in the battle for souls, for lives, which is just constantly being more clearly defined. with this upcoming election, this whole Health and Human Service mandate about contraception and abortifacients and sterilization and such. I mean, it is really upon us. The vehemence with which the pro-abortion side fights back, pretty vile at times. I mean, when our trips to San Francisco, some of the protesters they're pretty intense stuff we couldn't even air, stuff we just can't even air. I mean, how bad it gets, how adamant people are about this on both sides. Thank God, the pro-life side is rooted in, but we got the people out there off the deep end a bit. It's rooted in faith, in prayer, and conversation, and just exposing the truth. Okay, and your situation is a very clear and evident example of that truth. Tell us, if you can, take us kind of through those steps. You were 14, and your sister was the first one to kind of tip you off to the fact that you weren't just adopted, but that there was actually an attempt on your life. Kind of take us through that.
I never saw it coming. Looking back on it now, people always say, well, couldn't you have ever guessed that there was more to the story? Absolutely not. Never once would I have considered that my biological parents would have thought about an abortion, nonetheless actually following through with it. But when I was 14, like any really good teenage sisters, my sister and I could argue like the best of them. And during an argument one night with my sister, she said something that was so painful to me. She said, Melissa, at least my parents wanted me. And I'll never forget that night because it just hit me so deep in my soul. I had always felt so loved and so wanted. And I thought, how could your parents have wanted you so much more than mine wanted me when we ended up in the same house? And she encouraged me that night, to stay up and ask our parents for the truth about my life. And again, I couldn't have guessed what it was. I knew it had to be something really big because of the way my sister was responding to me and really encouraging for me to seek the truth. And so, I waited up that night for our parents to get home. And I'll never, I can't think of in my mind, looking back on it 20 years later, I can't remember where my father was that night, but I will never forget sitting our mother down, and it was a fall night. I was 14 years old, sat her down on the couch, much like this arrangement. And there in the dark of our living room, I told her about the argument that my sister and I had. And I will never forget the look on my mother's face because she was full of so much pain. And I thought, boy, I can't understand what's got to be so huge. And that night she sat down with me and she said, Melissa, there's no easy way to tell you this. She said, we never meant to keep it from you, but there's just no easy way to say it. She said, we love you, we'll always love you. And the words just fell out of her mouth that night. She said, Melissa, your mother had an abortion during her pregnancy with you, and you survived it. And it was utter devastation. Utter devastation. Not just for me, but for my mother also. I will never forget how many hours my mother sat on that couch and held me while we both just sobbed. I mean, they had lived with that truth for 14 years. I can't imagine how difficult it had been those 14 years. But then for the truth to come out, it was incredibly painful.
Did your sister ever apologize or ever kind of come around for the way she revealed this to you?
I think looking back on it now, she understands how much pain she truly caused me that night. In hindsight, as a teenager, she didn't understand just how much that was going to wound me. But in the grand scheme of things, great good has come from it. I don't know that there's any other way the truth would have come out. Our parents have said they didn't ever intend for me to know. Like any parent, we want to protect our children from something that we think is going to cause them great pain. And so, I'm accepting of the fact that this was just how it was intended to be.
How far along was your biological mother?
My birth mother was 19 years old, an unmarried college student when she went in for this abortion. She thought she was less than 5 months pregnant. The fact that I lived and I weighed a little less than 3 pounds, I was 2 pounds 14 ounces when I survived, points to the fact that she was much further along in her pregnancy. And when I actually obtained some of my medical records, one of the first notations by a doctor was that I looked like I was about 31 weeks, so almost 8 months gestation in the womb.
And the attempt on your life was in what fashion?
A saline infusion abortion. You know, a lot of people aren't aware of saline infusions because they're not done anymore, but they were routine back in the 1970s. And that type of procedure is pretty horrendous. It involves injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid that surrounds that preborn child in the womb. The intent of the salt solution is to scald the child to death from the outside in. So if you would look it up, you know, on the internet, you would find children like me called red-skinned or candy apple babies because it turns the skin bright red as it peels it away and moves internally into the organs. So here this toxic salt solution was delivered into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in my mother's womb, meant to scald me to death. And I soaked in that salt solution for almost 5 days, which was routine for the procedure. My birth mother was sent home after that salt solution was delivered. And she had to wait for the sign that the life inside of her had been effectively snuffed out. So on the 5th day of the abortion procedure, she went back to the hospital, which was, again, a routine procedure, had her premature labor induced with me, and was meant to give birth to a dead child that day at the hospital. From what I've been told, when I was delivered at the hospital, they believed that I was dead, and they actually left me for dead in my biological mother's hospital room. They were going to discard of me later, like so many children are still discarded of today. But by God's grace, as a nurse was tending to my biological mother there at the hospital, she looked over and realized that that tiny little baby they had left for dead was making small movements and making weak grunting noises. And that's when they realized that the abortion had not succeeded in ending my life. And you know, sadly for me, this is when people start to say that the doctors and nurses did something unthinkable. They provided me with medical care. I actually have had people who said, I don't know why they stepped in to save your life. You were such a liability. I'm not a liability. I'm just a fellow human being.
Right. So they went to you right away.
They did. You know, I have tears in my eyes because I am so thankful for them. I'm so thankful that they provided me with medical care. You know, you would never know it by looking at me today, that when I survived, I was fighting for my life. You know, I look perfectly healthy today. Gosh, if people passed me on the street, they never know that I suffered what I did. But the truth is that when I survived, I suffered from seizures for an extended period of time. I, because of that toxic salt solution, was starting to lose a lot of blood. And so I required multiple blood transfusions. I had severe respiratory problems, severe liver problems. I was too weak to suck from a bottle, and so I was fed through intravenous lines in my head. And the doctors made it clear they really didn't believe I was going to live for very long. And then, of course, as I started to surpass those odds, then they started to say things like, okay, she survived, but she's going to suffer from multiple disabilities.
These are the same doctors who just tried to take your life? Or do different doctors come in now?
The abortionist wasn't there at the time. You know, sadly, nurses are often left to finish the work.
Right.
So from what I gather, the abortionist was not there at the hospital. But it is, you know, it doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of things, does it?
No,
that
it doesn't.
On one floor of a hospital, or even just on one wing of a floor of a hospital, they're fighting to save a child's life. And on the other side, they're working to end a child's life.
Systematically killing them. And there are many stories of situations like this where the baby is just put in a bucket and left in a closet to just die from exposure oftentimes. But thank God there was the heart of whoever there to say, not on my watch, not this one. Mm-hmm. Any response from your mother, or do you know how she reacted when she found out that the abortion didn't take?
You know what, I don't know how my biological parents responded after they found out that the abortion had not succeeded. I can't imagine, you know, I just can't imagine being in their shoes in the first place, being placed that abortion was the only option for them, and then to find out that the abortion didn't succeed. You know, I hope that it gave them some peace knowing that their child didn't lose their life. But ultimately, you know, after I survived, they made the most loving decision for me, which was that adoption plan. You know, I wish they would have been able to make that decision in the first place.
Right. The saline solution is no longer used anymore. Do you know why that is?
Well, it's interesting. You know, that procedure, like I said, is horrendous in and of itself. But most survivors that existed and back then and still exist today, most survivors of failed abortion attempts were saline abortion survivors. Most people know of Gianna Jessen, who is also a pro-life speaker and advocate. Gianna's a failed saline infusion abortion survivor also. And, you know, certainly they learned from us that there needed to be much more horrendous ways to end a child's life because too many of us lived. And that's why we see things, you know, like dilation and extraction and all of the terrible methods that we see today.
All right. So when you find this out, and you were raised Methodist, so you had a faith base, there was something there. You're 14, your parents loved you, your adoptive parents loved you, but you started to change. And you said the change happened immediately.
You know, the night that I found out that I was a survivor, I felt such intense anger. I had never felt anger towards my biological parents in my life. And then to find out this terrible truth, you know, I couldn't understand at the age of 14 how they could do that to me. And so I was angry that night. You know, certainly my anger turned to a wash of sadness very quickly for them. You know, I suffered what I did, but they have had to live through and live with what happened. So I, you know, struggled with anger, but I also started to struggle with guilt. You know, knowing how many children have lost their lives, I thought, why me? Why do I get to live? And they don't. I'm no more special than they are. And to be perfectly healthy, you know, even though I struggled at the time after I survived, I'm healthy today. And I thought, well, gosh, who am I to say anything when I am so blessed? So I had to struggle with anger and guilt, shame. You know, we live in a world that talks about children who are aborted like they're unworthy, unloved, unwanted, just a mistake, just a clump of tissue. Gosh, I could go on forever about what the world says about children like me. And I didn't even have to leave the house to hear that. You know, I was protected by my family, but I could turn on the radio, open the newspaper, turn the TV on, and those are the things that I would hear. And those things started to weigh so heavily on me. And so the hole in my soul started to form. And I struggled. You know, I speak to a lot of young people now today, and I tell them that I made a lot of mistakes during those years. You know, I hurt so badly, and certainly my family didn't know, and my church didn't know, my school didn't know, because I put on that front that I was doing great. You know, oh yes, I'm an abortion survivor, but I know that God has mighty plans for my life, and I'm okay. I'm okay. I can just keep thinking of the I'm okay. I didn't want people to look on the inside, because if they looked on the inside, they would have seen how much I hated myself.
And so your lifestyle became a bit on the self-destructive side.
I was self-destructive, you know, struggled with an eating disorder, struggled with alcohol abuse. You know, I made poor dating choices. And the only thing that saved me was Jesus himself. You know, I always joke around with young people and say, I think sometimes your head wants to blow up when adults tell you that, but I am living proof that none of those choices I made my life any better. What they did was make it worse.
It compounded the misery.
Absolutely, by thousands. And the one thing that always kept me and brought me back to that peaceful, joyful place in my life was Jesus. And I'm so thankful for that.
You know, you're a great example, Melissa, of, you know, when parents out there come to me and say, well, my kid's strayed away, or my kid's struggling with this and that, we've raised him in the faith. But you were given a foundation so that you knew Christ was real. You were told that Christ was loving and forgiving. So your adoptive parents gave you this. So even when you strayed, you had that to look back to. You had that point of reference, at least, to cling to. Even though people may not have been the ones to move you that direction, people were the ones who established that already there.
Absolutely.
So you come back to Christ, What was that like when you kind of, as you explained to me earlier, you hit your head against the wall enough and realize this isn't getting me anywhere? I kind of imagine it as then your eyes fill up with the blood from the wound and you start thinking, wait, this is only making it worse. I've got to stop this. What did you do? You turn back to prayer?
Absolutely.
You turn your life around? Describe that a little bit.
Well, so 14 is hard in and of itself. And, I always tell young people I wouldn't go back and do that over again. I like 34 the way it is. But it's hard to be a young person. And so the foundation that you have is so important. And I think that's why parents' roles are so important, to ground their children in the faith. And what's hard for me is, we know research tells us when people go away to college, they often turn their back on their faith and their beliefs. And I always tell young people, those are the things that will keep you alive, literally alive, and keep you moving in the right direction. And so, I turned back to my faith. I started to really keep myself open to what God was telling me about my life, because I knew that there was an amazing purpose for my life, but I was so fearful, thinking we live in this world that talks so negatively about children who are aborted and embraces this culture of death. I can't do this. I mean, I don't know how to go about even starting. And so I had those conversations with God throughout those years, and it was when I finally really surrendered myself to Him and said, whatever it is you want me to do, wherever you intend for me to go, you know what? I give it all up for you. It's not about me and what I want for my life and what I want for, my work and my purpose. Whatever it is you want for me to do in this world for you, I will do it.
A couple of things come to my mind when you talked about this, Melissa. Number one is that you had to make a conscious decision. You had to make it. You could have wallowed in the pity party. You could have claimed victim, literally, for the rest of your life and use that as an excuse for any and all, destructive behavior, what have you. And who would have looked at you and thought, oh, get over it? I mean, we can look at you and say, this is a woman who knows that someone attempted to kill her. And it was her own mother, in her own womb. I mean, where a child is supposed to be the safest. And yet we have convinced ourselves in this world that it's okay to take the life of that child in the place where that child is supposed to be the safest. So yeah, you would have every reason to, but you chose not to live a life of wallowing in this pity and in this self, indulgence and such. You chose to say, I'm getting out of this. So first that comes to my mind, and we can all learn from that. And the second thing is, don't you think, as I do, so don't you agree with me already? Let me tell you first.
I'm sure that I do.
I hope you do. But don't you think that we're all, when we have this idea of faith, and we kind of think we're grounded in it, we know it, and then God always seems to allow this to happen. Whether it's Job, losing all of his possessions and his crops, and then eventually his own health, boils on his body and so forth, and family members' lives being taken, or whether it's Peter and the other apostles who bragged they would never leave Jesus, but they had no clue what was around the corner, and then all of a sudden they all scatter. Isn't there that moment for each of us where we think we got it going down with the faith? Oh, sure, it's a little tough, and then boom, something hits. And now we're really tested. Is that kind of what happened?
Absolutely. And I've had continuous tests throughout my life. I think many people do. And I love that you use the word conscious and deliberate, because that's, I think, an important part in my life. I always say, certainly, it's God's mighty hand, but it takes a conscious decision on our part to surrender and be obedient.
Right.
And that is transformational. And so absolutely, yes, I have seen in my life, in those moments where a test is put before me, when I accept His will. It may not be anything I had planned for myself, but when it is His will and I accept it and I surrender, I have seen the most amazing things happen in my life. And I want that for everyone out there.
So you're married now, and Ryan. Ryan, I know you're watching. Clock's ticking here. He's on board here, pal. You'll know what that is in a little bit. But you have a wonderful young child now, two, one with our Lord and one that God has brought to you, living now. What is it like to be in this position where married with a child and you're speaking about this, you're telling the world about this, you're pleading with them to take seriously this whole understanding of the beauty, the dignity of each and every life? What is that like now to be on this side of it? After you went through everything from being raised in an adopted family, love my family, they love me, then boom, you're hit hard with the reality that there was an attempt on your life. Then you go through all the grieving and the anger and the behavior situations that were destructive, and then you come back, and now look at you. You know, by the grace of God, He has you doing this. And what's that like now?
You know, it's been an interesting journey for me. When I was 19, I started looking for my birth family and trying to obtain my medical records in preparation for this moment in time. And that, you know, that's been part of my healing process. I spent 10 years looking for them, 10 years trying to obtain my medical records. In those years, I met my husband, who is the love of my life, you know, got my master's degree in social work. And even though people might have thought we had the best life ever during those years, I can tell you the life that we have right now is more blessed and amazing than I ever could have imagined for us. You know, we make sacrifices. I travel around the world now advocating for people to choose life and working with organizations and assisting people. And so sometimes I'm gone from my family for extended periods of time, but my family understands that we are fighting a war. This is a battle. And the work that we are doing and the sacrifices that we make as a family are making an impact in this world for the better.
Right. And it requires a unique set of parameters and such that you and your husband have said yes to, and here you are. Now, in just a few moments, we're going to see a clip of a video that you're involved in. Can you explain this video, A Voice for Life, what we're going to see here in just a moment?
A Voice for Life is a project that, you know, once again, I didn't have intended for my life, but God intended for this film to be created. And it's telling of my story as an abortion survivor, some pretty in-depth things that I never intended to come out, you know, and me without makeup and all of these, you know, I know, but trust me, as a woman and a speaker, there are just some things that you intend for the world to see. And so...
Is that true, ladies? Is it...
Thank you.
The audience
Thank you.
Okay.
There are times you see yourself on the big screen and think, oh my goodness, this is so not about me, it's about God's kingdom.
I feel that way every time I look at my hair on the show. Just kidding.
But all kidding aside, you know, this film is about how all of us are touched by abortion. And so it shares the stories of men and women who have been impacted by abortion, you know, the struggles that they've had, but how they've been able to find healing. You know, there's amazing people in it like Father Pavone, Alveda King, Janet Morana, you know, just amazing people and people from pregnancy centers to talk about life and how all of us are called to be a voice for life, not just me as a survivor, but all of us are called to be a voice for life and to be able to give a voice to our experiences if we've been impacted by abortion.
Yeah, great point. We're all called to be part of this. Okay, everybody out there in TV land, you'll get to see this, and if you're just listening in Radioville, you'll get to hear it. Clip from A Voice for Life.
Instead of being aborted, I was born.
Not only did I survive an abortion, but I did because God saved my life. And here are all of the amazing things He did in my life.
Samuel squeezes and the doctor shakes. And that's the moment I took the picture.
You mean there's a heart beating?
She would send me an email and check up on me. And that's when I began the healing process.
The most dangerous place for any human being in New York City right now is in the womb of their own mother.
She is that voice calling out from the womb saying, you know, I have a life, you know, I'm alive, please let me live.
Motherhood does not prevent success. Parenthood works, it does.
And that this generation will abolish abortion in our lifetimes.
They're the future, and their mothers chose life. That's why we're here.
Because people can look at me and think that I'm a victim in this, but I'm going to assure you all tonight that I am not a victim at all.
He knew I was going to do it before I ever did it. That is a wonderful creation.
She aborted you and you lived. Thank you on behalf of my little girl.
Thank you so much for what you're doing.
I can't imagine what the world would be like without her. And that's what I want people to understand.
Life is precious, life is from God, and life begins at the moment when conception occurs. There you have it. And you're right. We are all called to be advocates for life. I mean, if we have blood flowing through our veins, breath in our lungs, we're alive. God has given us that life. We're all responsible, not just in your case. You just have been placed in a very unique situation. But everybody has an opportunity to evangelize the truth about life, you know.
We have to ask you, Melissa, did you ever track down your biological mother?
So after 10 years of searching, I did obtain my medical records in 2007, and I did find out who my biological parents were. You know, blessing of all blessings, I learned I was living in the same city as my birth father. I didn't grow up in that city. That was God's plan. I never did find my biological mother, but I found her parents. And, you know, I reached out to both them and to my biological father. You know, sadly, I never heard back from my biological father from the letter that I sent him. He ended up losing his life about 6 months after I wrote to him. But my biological grandparents did respond to me. And, you know, I'm grateful for that. They let me know about my family. They admitted to the abortion in the letter. You know, sadly, they told me that my mother had never told another living soul about the abortion or about me, and that in recent years they had become estranged from her, and so they wouldn't be passing along my message of forgiveness and love to her. And that was very hard for me because I want her to know that I love her, as I do anyone who's impacted by an abortion. But I know that this is what God intended for the world to see through my family that is still, you know, broken today. Abortion has affected each and every one of us. You know, it's been 34 years since that abortion took place, and I am really the only one in my family who is been able to find healing and is whole. You know, my biological father never told anyone about the abortion or about me, and he lost his life carrying that secret to his grave. And I fight for him every day, just like I do for every other man in this world, because no man deserves to suffer the way that my father did. And I believe that's my father's gift to this world, is to say, men, if you've been impacted by an abortion, you can speak about it. No matter what the world has said, it does involve you. Right. And you have the right to grieve, and you have the right to speak out. And that's my father's gift to this world.
Yeah, you're right on. And you know what? We will never know until we die, because God keeps it silent to us what all these little areas of work that we do, how it affects people. But what you're doing is such an important area, such a critical area. So God bless you and keep it up. And I just want to tell the audience that Melissa is now taking the steps to come to the Catholic faith. So she's in the process of doing that. Ryan, clock's ticking. So come on, buddy, hop on board. It's my little man-to-man to you there. So God bless you. Thank you so much for being with us. Keep up your great work.
Thank you. Right. Thank you, Father.
May our Heavenly Father shine His face upon you and give you His peace, and may Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We'll see you next week.